We have a special guest, MP Tamarin Breedt. We shall focus on South African politics, the issues that the country faces, keeping in mind the upcoming general elections in 2024. Usually when a guest turns up on an interview, it is me who basically glorifies the person. So in today's case, what we'll do is we'll let Tammy say who you are basically. There's our audiences range from Middle East to India to Pakistan and even local viewers in the UK as well. So now is your time to showcase and tell them who you are basically. So over to you, Tammy.
Awesome. Thank you, Zaid. And thank you so much for having me at this political society. I really appreciate it. I think it is a necessary event. To start out, my name is, as you said, Tamarin Breedt. I am an MP for a party called the Freedom Front Plus in South Africa. We are the 5th largest political party represented in South Africa. And maybe a bit about myself. I am also our national youth leader. So I was recently also elected to be a deputy leader in my province, which is kind of like in the UK counties, a deputy leader. And then, of course, I also serve as our Federal Council's chairperson on international relations, which then, of course, gives me the platform. As the Freedom Front Plus, we represent the Afrikaner, which is a minority grouping in South Africa, and we represent them at the UNPO, which is a international minority organization called the Unrepresented Nations and Peoples Organization, and there I also serve on the presidency. So that's just a bit my political background. I've been in politics since I started out when I was 18 years old. So I've been in politics for more than a decade, and that's who I am. I was raised and born in Johannesburg, which is our economic capital, if you want to call it that, of South Africa. But I am based in my constituency is in the Free State, Bloemfontein, which is our judicial capital and also a very rural province where we have a lot of agriculture and farming activities. I came to university here. I studied at the University of the Free State, and I've been here all along. At university, I was very fortunate. We also had organizations and things. I was on the Student Representative Council, and I was also speaker of our student parliament. What that we did there. So I've come a long way in politics. Even though I'm young, I've done a lot, and I've served on many forums in our political party. So that's just short who I am. And yes, I'm grateful to be here with you guys.
That is indeed an impressive bio. A lot of stuff to cover over there. Yes, I mean, hopefully I've enjoyed your journey. The main questions regarding the elections has to be because South Africa faces a plethora of issues. Some of them could be traced to electricity issues, power cuts, high crime rates. There's a lot of corruption going on between the parties, wealth inequality as well, and especially natural disasters such as floods. So, I mean, I'm pretty sure you must have done a lot of research on these issues as well as a party member and MP as well. What do you think is going to be the most pressing issue going into the next election?
If you look at South Africa and you look, as you rightly say, we have a plethora of issues. I think it would be shorter maybe to list the things we are doing good, and that would, I think, start and stop with our sport. We have done very well there. In terms of South Africa, and in terms of what is the biggest for I think my constituents, maybe before I answer that, I should maybe, and I forgot to mention this, give a brief background of the Freedom Front Plus. I mentioned we were the 5th largest political party, but what is the Freedom Front Plus and what do we stand for? We are what you would call a niche political party that specifically focuses on minorities and minority rights, specifically in terms of linguistic, cultural, religious rights in South Africa. In South Africa, we have legislation that is quite race-based, that is based on majority prejudice against minorities, and you actually see minorities being disadvantaged by ways of our ruling party and our legislation. So we are specifically in that sphere. So we would not necessarily go out to chase votes for the sake of chasing votes, to have to be the official opposition, for example. We would focus on our niche, on minorities, and fight for that, even though and economists have actually regarded our economic policy as one of the best policies of all of the political parties currently. We even went as far as to write up an economic recovery plan for South Africa. As you know, we have very low economic growth in South Africa. We have an unemployment rate of over the 32%. If you take that to youth unemployment, you get closer to the 60% mark of youth aged between 18 and 24 years old. It goes slightly lower to in the 40s when you look at the complete 18 to 35-year-old category. But that is what the Freedom Front Plus stands for. Taking that into account, to say what are the biggest issues that we see our constituents having to deal with, and I think it can be broadly summed up as service delivery. We are service delivery in terms of electricity supply. Not only do we have load shedding, and I don't know if your society knows what load shedding is. I read an article a few weeks back where England was, it was a heading that said nationwide blackouts for England. And we in South Africa got a bit of a laugh because everybody else finds it shocking, and we've had to deal with this for 15 years, so we've gotten used to it. You
can probably go ahead and say what load shedding is. If, for example, people don't know, you can go ahead, because even I'm of Indian descent, so back living in India as well, I know what load shedding is, and it's really horrible to deal with it. Trust me.
It's horrible to deal with. So that is basically where our national electricity distributor doesn't produce enough electricity for the whole country the whole time. So it goes in phases from stage 1 to stage 8, which governs the amount of time electricity is switched off at a stage, and then certain areas then face blackouts. That is actually why I'm currently at home and speaking to you from home and not my office, is to circumnavigate load shedding and to be able to have internet connectivity and lights and everything. So that is one major issue, is our load shedding. I have in my constituency a municipality that has Eskom, which is our energy distributors, Eskom mandated load shedding, but also municipal mandated load shedding. For example, during the winter months, they only had electricity for a maximum of 5 hours per day, and that would usually be between the hours of 11 in the evening and 4 in the morning, and the rest of the day they would be without electricity. Businesses have to pack up and leave, have to close down because of this, because the extreme cost of having generators and buying diesel or petrol to actually supply yourself with electricity is very bad. But service delivery in general, this exact town I'm also talking about, has been without water now for the past 56 days. Where load shedding impacts your water distribution, but also because of 30 years of mismanagement in South Africa, of 30 years of proper maintenance not being done, of contractors getting contracts and tenders who aren't efficient in doing their work, we have infrastructure collapse, which impacts service delivery. And that, of course, then impacts. You can, for example, think children who are in their final year of schooling, who have now had to go through a matric exam, had to deal with not being able to bath, not being able to shower, not having lights to study by. Then you have to go to school, but public transport is a nightmare. Learner transport sometimes doesn't even arrive or arrives 2 or 3 hours late. The roads you have to travel to have potholes, which is big gaping holes in the middle of the road. I was in Barcelona recently, and there was one kind of pothole, and I was like, yes, a pothole somewhere elsewhere, and because it's not something you know, and that then all adds to the high unemployment rate, the low level of economic growth, because you can think for yourself, if you cannot operate a business, if you don't have water to supply your patrons, if you don't have electricity to have your computers operating, your air conditioning functioning, if you're a restaurant, you're cooking, you have a business. Therefore, people lose their jobs because you cannot afford to bring them in. And this creates this big spiral, which then affects everything at the end of the day.
No, that's certainly a lot of amount of problems that South Africa is facing. I don't. There's a really heavy work cut out for like whichever a party or government is formed, and speaking of electoral opponents, I know ANC, the poll ratings, it's been showing that it's probably not going to form a government. But then when it comes to your other opponents, such as, Julius Malema's party, do you think it's gonna what do you call hamper some of your votes in some of your constituencies? Is he a big challenger in the government as well?
Well, let's firstly start. I think us in the EFF, the Economic Freedom Fighters, the party which Julius...
The reason why I ask you this question is he seems to be very popular on social media channels, TikTok, and then his really extreme views as well. So like, how does it affect you?
He is... we are always quite at loggerheads, if I can say that. We are on the polar opposite sides of the spectrum, where he believes in nationalization of mines, of land, of business, and where us as the Freedom Front Plus believe in privatization. We need to privatize our electricity regulator. We need to see the more market access. We need to see all of those things. So we're quite on polar opposite ends. The current pollings in South Africa shows them around 12 to 14%, sometimes a bit lower to the 10, 11%. They currently standing at 12, 13% of my figures, if I remember that correctly. So it doesn't show a vast increase in their figures currently. During lockdown and COVID, we used to joke in Parliament about them being hidden out in their bunker, because you would never see them. They would never come to Parliament. They would really be hiding out. And so what we've seen is he's very popular on social media, very popular amongst youth in South Africa. He is quite radical in his pronunciations against farm attacks, farm murders, nationalization, specifically minorities. And he's quite radical. What we have seen in South Africa, however, is our youth are not going out to register to be able to go out and vote. We see our 18 to 19-year-olds, only 15% of them actually being registered to be able to vote in the 2024 election. Between 19 and 29-year-olds, we see that go slightly up to around the margins of 30%. If you, however, take the amount of them that go out and vote, it almost halves. So even though they are quite popular on social media, People see them. That's the first thing. Media and news outlets, focus a lot on them. They are battling. And if you look at our last registration weekend, which was the weekend of the 18th and the 19th of November, where we had all our voting stations open and you could go and either register or re-register, make sure you were on the voters roll to be eligible to vote in 2024. We see that of the 2.7 million people that went out to go check their registration status or to register, only 257,000 of them were young people, were people under the age of 35. So you're not seeing a large number of young people going out to register to be able to vote, and that is where their strength lies. So even though you should be cognizant of the EFF, cognizant of not only what they say, but the threat for government, and let me be clear, I think the EFF in a government as part of a coalition would be a mistake. I think they are not good for South Africa. I think they add to race relations and intolerance within the country. I think their policies are skewed. I think that their policies, because they are a social Marxist party, as we've seen with all socialist countries, is not the answer. It creates more joblessness, it creates more problems, it creates less economic growth, and we can't afford that at this stage. So I do not necessarily think we have to be too worried about them, but I think it is cognizance that we need to make sure that they do not garner more votes or maybe take away from the ANC, which is our governing party.
So, I mean, what I could take from your explanation is your concern is that the EFF could probably go in with the government, which is the ANC, probably in the next election. But what do you say about your own coalition, which is probably feels like a significant moment in South African politics, because it's like 7 parties coming together against the long incumbent one, which is the ANC. So how's the strategy working out for you? Is there internal cohesion? Because there's like what's the plan going on over there?
So yes, we have what we currently call the coalition. Is we call it the multi-party charter. And the multi-party party, we've actually garnered a few more political parties. I think we're standing at 8 or 9 opposition parties that have actually now been added to our list. And what this is, I think this is a first for South African politics. It makes me excited about South African politics, and I think we are moving a step in the right direction. If I can maybe give you a brief history. We have 3 types of elections in South Africa. Municipal election, which is your local government. Then you've got your provincial and your national election. National and provincial elections run together, and your local government election runs separately. In 2016, our previous local government election, we had, of the 257 municipalities in South Africa, only 11 were coalition-run municipalities. After the 2021 municipal elections or local government elections, we are standing at over 50 municipalities in coalition governments and 13 in minority government rule. Where we don't have a clear 51% as a coalition, but there are minorities. That is absolutely amazing to look at the progression, taking into account how young the South African democracy is, how the ANC have, up until this stage, dominated South African politics, and that gives me hope. I think us as opposition parties came to the realization that not one political party would outright be able to beat the ANC. Also, that is not a responsible government. To have one kingmaker, to have one party in government, You make and break the rules, specifically a party that has over 50%, like the ANC currently has 56%. They have a simple majority and they can just make or break rules, implement legislation as they want to be. There isn't those checks and balances that a government needs, that a country needs to actually go forward. And that was what the opposition parties said, is we can actually work together. We all have our voter base, our supporters. The Freedom Front Plus has minorities. We have the Afrikaans community, we have the Afrikaner community, we have the colored community, we have all of these different communities that find us. You have the ACDP, the African Christian Democratic Party, which brings their perspective. You have the Democratic Alliance, you have the IFP, the Inkatha Freedom Party, that is quite a predominantly Zulu party. So you've got all of these that have their maximum votes, but together we can find common ground. And we have 8 points that we could find commonality on, with regards to economic growth, with regards to unemployment, with regards to load shedding, education, health, where we could find each other on and say, this is the way forward, or this is what we agree with. And the prospect would be then to work together. Also taking into account how our election work, we would only after election have 2 weeks to set up a government and to have coalition talks, which really isn't enough to get the nitty-gritties sorted out. And that is the idea of doing that beforehand, but also having South Africans know that, we all are specific political parties. And we stand for specific things, and you need to vote for your specific political party to actually make their voting power, their bargaining power more in a coalition like that, to see more of your power. But I think it's a first for South Africa. I think it's exciting for South Africa. I think it gives hope, because for the first time, there's a real opportunity and a possibility that the ANC can be unseated as the single majority ruling party of South Africa.